All right, well, we're due to start at 12. It's 12:02. So I'll keep monitoring the participant case list and let people in as needed. Again, if you're just getting on to this Zoom call, I've placed everyone on mute. If you want to ask a question or if you have a clarifying statement that you need to make, please use the chat function. We are recording this session and we'll post it at the conclusion. All right. So if you're new to Whitmore Lake Public Schools, my name is Tom DeKeyser. I'm the superintendent. Last week, Whitmore Lake posted its COVID mitigation strategies. And in particular, masks became a hot topic. So before we jump right into masks, the purpose is to clarify the district's COVID mitigation strategies. And I will give you time for questions, but before I get into anything else, just a couple of statements. First of all, please understand as you're reacting to this news that Whitmore Lake has to, in fact, have COVID mitigation strategies, and we have to work with health officials on those COVID mitigation strategies. There are legal reasons for that, and there are practical reasons for that. So practically, I would tell you that I am and have been an advocate for what I call local control of our school districts. The health department may at some point in time issue an order and tell us what to do relative to masks and COVID mitigation strategies. At this time, they have not issued that order, and I'm an advocate of that because last year, I believe that Whitmore Lake Public Schools led progressively with COVID policies and how to open schools and run schools safely during last year's pandemic crisis. I don't want to say we were an expert, but I would say we do have the most experience in running in-person schools in our county. And so it's with that mindset that I work with the health officials, and I've been advocating, to keep schools open, find ways to get kids in school. That's job number one. And of course, we have to do it in conjunction with safety as much as possible. So speaking of last year, here's what we did. If you don't remember, we implemented a very rigid hygiene protocol. We had hand washing, we had lots of cleaning going on. We encouraged people to stay home, to get tested if they had symptoms. And eventually we were armed with, no pun intended, vaccines. And and that worked well for us. In addition, we were fully masked preschool through 12th grade, all of our buildings, all of our staff. We practiced social distancing, and probably the number one strategy that Whitmore Lake employed that a lot of people ended up following if they went back to school was we would take periodic breaks from in-person instruction and rely on remote learning models. The strategies this year are similar, but we don't have that break from in-person learning tool any longer. We haven't been given the legal flexibility to employ it, and it's been a challenge for me because that I thought was very effective last year, but that has to be legislatively approved. So we go into this year, without one of our major tools. And not the flexibility to kind of manage all the social distancing that we wanted, because we can't just put people on hybrid schedules or separate. We've got people coming back into our schools with higher volumes. So this strategies that we had last year worked well. At the high school in particular, we ended the year with some of the same things that we've done historically. We ended up having proms and graduations. Our spring sports went off fine. And it seemed like we were kind of coming out of it. We didn't have any increased cases. We remained masked throughout. And then as the year came to a conclusion, we called it a pretty successful conclusion. At the elementary, as the year bore on, we started to see a surge towards the end of the year in cases, and we did have some outbreak cases. So this year, we want to start the school year without the flexibility of taking breaks. We want to start the school year with masks required in the elementary. And the number one reason really is we can't employ all the same strategies as we did last year. And those children cannot be vaccinated. So at the high school, we have a larger building. We have a population of students that can be vaccinated. And we plan on keeping, the same types of strategies as best as we can, separating people as much as possible. But we do think that a mask optional approach will work there safely. At the elementary level, we've got kids returning to the classroom. Our separation is only 3 feet. And again, that population cannot be masked. So an obvious conclusion that I came to is to start the school year, let's adhere to one additional layer of COVID mitigation, and that is masks. I have a lot of comments on it. I could expand further. I could get into the detail of, how we're going to navigate some of the things like lunches and everything else. But let me just take a pause and start entertaining some of the chat questions, because I know masks are the hot topic, and I want to give people a chance to get that out as much as possible and to address it as much as possible. So trying to start from the top to the bottom, how will WLPS support social and emotional needs for kids during the pandemic? So we are bringing back, as much as possible, all of our staff, of course, our social workers and our county level programs. Some of the county level programs related to social emotional learning that were offered in person in our buildings in 2019 will probably still be remote. They rely on other institutions to make those policies to bring them to us. But, independent of COVID, we did beef up our social emotional staffing, and we did that through partnerships. We will continue that. In addition, we do have some new curricula. Every time we purchase something new, there are social emotional evaluation points in those new curricula. So. Will there be things that teachers will implement in the classrooms that support the questions above? Again, I'm sorry, I just touched on that. Yes, with any new piece of curriculum that we add, there are always social and emotional supports built in. Jen asks, will there be a virtual option offered again? So last year we offered a virtual academy. Again, if you were with us last year, we really had kind of 3 options. We had people that maybe would stay with a contracted virtual school, and they had no interaction with Whitmore Lake Public School teachers. And then we had what we called the Whitmore Lake Virtual Academy, and we hired our own teachers to run that in, independently of the way we were running our classrooms, but in sync with our curriculum. So when kids did come back to our schools in person, they enrolled in the grade level they were at, and they're pretty much right on track. So we are not doing that this year. We really don't have a lot of people asking for it. And at some point we had to make a decision because it does carry a significant expense. So no, we're not offering our Whitmore Lake Virtual Academy as we did last year. We will continue to offer our contracted academy. Here's a question. Would you ever consider implementing a mask policy for unvaccinated students ages 12 plus? I didn't touch on this because it does get into the details, but yes, I would say that everything I'm telling you right now is fluid, and it depends on local data. I mentioned that I have been advocating for local control. One of the strengths of local control, that means Whitmore Lake gets to make the decision while consulting with health officials. one of the strengths of having that local control really is looking at our local situation. If we have two different buildings doing two different things relative to COVID mitigation strategies. If one is working very well and the other one isn't working well, we're seeing high levels of cases, or we have to quarantine kids because of close contact restrictions, then yeah, we can adjust to that. Blanket countywide policies take aggregate data from the entire region, and they subject us sometimes unnecessarily to restrictions that we don't want. At the same time, if we can always elevate, and in particular, I would say if we're seeing spikes at the high school level, if Washtenaw County moves to high risk community spread level, yes, we would respond with a K-12 mask requirement in our buildings. Will there be contact tracing this year? Yes, there will be. It's a little different. At the elementary, it's 3 feet. At the high school, it's 6 feet. One of the biggest things that I've been advocating for is to limit who goes home, and the health department has supported that. So no longer does a close contact of a positive case have to quarantine for 10 to 14 days. What they do have to do is they have to put a mask on if they're at the elementary or if they're at the high school level, and then we just watch for symptoms. And so that allows for a lot. We still have to do the tracing, but it allows for a lot more kids to stay in school as long as they're asymptomatic. Here's a question, a specific one, but 7th grader not old enough to be vaccinated. Will younger students be kept separate than the older ones? No, well, yes. I mean, we do keep our grades, our middle school students somewhat separate. They don't have classes. They don't eat lunch with them. They're in their own hallway for the most part. There is some mingling going on within the hallways that can occur, but nothing that ever would reach 15 minutes. I'll read the question from it says, the document that I shared didn't share how students learn when in quarantine. So we will employ the same type of zoom in strategy. So if your student, your son or daughter is COVID positive, or symptomatic as a close contact, and he or she has to stay away from our classroom, then we will zoom them in remote and use remote learning like we did last year. Michigan is just allowing districts to make decisions regarding masks. That's true in some areas. It's not true everywhere. I'm still working and trying to figure out, Livingston County is still in what they call high risk community spread. Washtenaw has never been in high risk community spread. We are in what they call substantial. Genesee County did issue an executive order from their health department, basically saying that all students K-6 have to wear masks. Students in 7-12 grades can be mask optional, and a very similar policy to what we're saying at Whitmore Lake. But I do know that Genesee County was in high risk and just went back to substantial risk. So, everything with COVID changes, but we do have to kind of set a policy and a set of standards to get the year started. So I'm a little bit behind. Let me keep going back to these chat questions. Will there be high school buses with elementary students on them, or buses with high school and elementary students on them? No, we have 2 separate runs. Asymptomatic people can still spread COVID. Why not play it safe and quarantine for 7 days? Again, I'm just going to keep falling back on this. I do work with the health department on this. They might change that, but that is their guidance. They really want, and they've listened to us strongly when we've said We want kids in school. I will tell you a little bit off topically, every school deals with what they call achievement gaps. They exist everywhere. And they're exasperated in families with extreme poverty and without access to health and social care. And uh, schools that had in-person learning, more in-person learning last year, did not exacerbate their gap. Schools that did not have in-person learning, the achievement gap widened. And so the health department, they got to juggle. They know that achievement gap exists. We've hammered them with that. We, as school districts, want kids in school. And so what we are committed to is to keep sharing numbers with them, to working with them, but it is their guidance on how long to quarantine. And they have said that as long as the kids aren't symptomatic, they can stay in school. They are saying if we do that, though, they have to wear masks. Yep, and we have just a further comment that how startling that can be to a parent who might have an immunocompromised family member sending your kid to school. I would strongly recommend that if you have those family situations, that you implore your kids to wear masks while in our buildings, and you take measures outside of school to stay safe as well. And I would further tell you that we didn't have wide, short of one pocket of at the end of the year in an elementary school, we did not have in-school spread. I think twice we were labeled an outbreak school, but one of those was because of a carpooling situation. It had nothing to do with our classrooms. And the other one was an after-school care situation, had nothing to do with our instructional classrooms. So while it does sound from people's perspective that we could be careless with this and not putting enough restrictions in place, that is what we saw last year. We know we're dealing with a Delta variant, which they say is more contagious, which is why we've added the additional layer for kids who can't be vaccinated. I've got a clarifying question. If Washtenaw County hits high status, WLHS will require masks regardless of a mandate from a county. Yep, that is what I've recommended. I just want to reinforce, please listen to this reinforcement. This is how we're starting. I've been told that Washtenaw County has a vaccine rate that is so high, we will not be in high risk. That substantial will be the highest we go. We will kind of go between moderate and substantial most of the year. But I also want to tell you that more and more, I believe they're going to hang their hat on local control. And more, Whitmore Lake Public Schools is going to look at their own local data to make decisions. But yes, this is how we're starting. If we move to high, we're going to flip the switch and say everyone wears them. And that includes any schools that Whitmore Lake has on its campuses. If we go to high, we're making everyone do it. As a parent, I feel it would be unsafe for kids to attend school. Will they be able to quarantine and use Zoom? So you do have some choices. If you're a close contact, I assume that's what you mean. Yes, there could be some, if you're a close contact and you're concerned about it, you don't have to stay. We would allow you to Zoom in for the 10 days of quarantine. There are some limitations to that. I'd have to start making some decisions as everyone started to do that. But I think, that as long as people are subjecting themselves to testing regularly, we can navigate that effectively. Are we notified if someone in our child's class is asymptomatic but a close contact? We have to do the same thing as last year. Yes, if there's a positive case, we have to tell people, and it has to be reported. If you're a close contact, you will be notified that you're a close contact, and then we'll share with you what mitigation strategies we're going to employ in that classroom, how many kids were close contacts. We're looking for a reduced number this year. That's what we're expecting. But like last year, if we had close contacts in a classroom, it wasn't unusual to go from, a close contact we'd be a dozen kids would leave. because of one positive case. I am expecting that to drop to more like 4, but it will still happen. All right. I'm not seeing any new questions pop up. Let me just see if someone's waiting. So, how far? Oh, here's a lunch question. Lunch is a good question. Um, so, at the high school, we'll space out as much as we can. We have a much bigger lunchroom, um, and but we'll start the year using our cafeteria, and um, and remember, masks aren't required while people are eating, so we are trying to do every other seat. Um, and at the elementary, we are going every other seat, and that's about as much spacing as we can get. Um, and then we'll still be using. Um, we are trying to expand. Actually, we are expanding the amount of time we spend outside too. So, um, rather than having a kid with, 5 to 10 minutes of outdoor time squished in around lunch, we will be expanding that to a half hour, I believe. But elementary will be every other seat. Breakfast will be in the morning in the classrooms. And at the high school, we'll use our cafeteria more than we did last year, but we will be spacing it out as much as possible. A lot of people ask this question, show me the studies. I'm just going to tell you, log on to the CDC website, find them yourself. They're there. What is the contingency plan if a teacher in a classroom tests positive? Again, first of all, it's a good question. We do have to treat staff different than students. So if the teacher is vaccinated and they test positive, they do have to go home. And then we would do contact tracing with any kid who was associated with as a close contact of that teacher. What we did last year, and it was pretty effective, is we basically hire a sub, and then we have the teachers Zoom in if they're able to. And a lot of teachers, if they had COVID, they did remain healthy for most of the quarantine period. There were a couple situations where they were sick for a couple of days and couldn't do it, but they wanted their face at least in front of the kids and them as involved with the classroom as much as possible. Especially with younger kids, the longer you take that teacher away from them, the harder it is to build those relationships back up. So that worked effectively. We'll follow the same pattern. Will elementary students be allowed mass breaks, outdoor recess time? Yes, we are following a recess pattern like we did last year, and we always have mass breaks built in. For instance, last year, and the teacher models this. There are more kids in the classroom, so we do want to be careful, but we recognize that everyone needs a break every once in a while from this. So the teachers will model it. They'll tell them how to do it. Certainly if kids are tight, packed, and working on a project together, the teacher isn't going to allow a mass break at that time. When the kids go back to their class desk and they have some separation of 3 feet, then it's appropriate to periodically take the mask down, take a deep breath, put it back up. As I wait for a few more questions to pour in, I do want to emphasize, and I've started off the Zoom meeting by saying this, and I'm going to try to conclude with it and emphasize it as much as possible. I know there's people on each side of this, people who want more strict guidelines and people who want less restrictive guidelines relative to how we're going to use masks. And, I believe that we're picking the safest route, but I am telling you, this is how we are going to begin our school year. I'm also reinforcing that we work with our health department and we want local control to remain with Whitmore Lake Public Schools. We look at our local data. We know the number of cases in our area, And, um, and we also know that our COVID mitigation strategies worked very effectively last year. We didn't have significant outbreaks, any outbreaks in our classrooms. And if we start the year and it looks like that trend continues, we can always be less restrictive. If we see the opposite, we can always be more restrictive. Um, I wish I didn't have to be a superintendent who managed pandemic policy, but I'm happy that I get to work with the health department and health officials who at least are respecting the work we did last year and giving me the respect to try to make those decisions. Well, masks are child abuse. Well, I've seen child abuse. No, I think that's hyperbole, but I get that some kids really don't like them. Um, I get that parents don't like them probably more than kids, but um, I'll tell you, if you really feel like your kid's being harmed by it, see a pediatrician. If a pediatrician will um, uh, state in writing that the masks are harming your kid, we will make exceptions, and we'll work with your individual student on how to use our mask requirement. I feel like I missed one, but let me see here. Um, in the elementary school, will grade levels be able to socialize with other classes of the same grade? Yes. So one of the restrictions we don't have to employ this year, and we're not going to, is when kids go outside at recess, they can be mask free and they can interact with other cohorts. So outdoors is being treated a lot differently than it was last year. Um, and we don't have to contact trace right now outside. Um, and we'll certainly be watching it. If kids are doing something that looks like they've could be compromising their health, we might have to include them. But your typical playground behavior does not warrant close contact tracing and does not warrant the use of masks. And that's how we're going to start the year. Um, yeah, I don't, masks aren't restraint and seclusion, but again, if your child has a health concern, see a pediatrician, share that with me. We will keep it confidential and we'll report to the teacher how masks are going to work for individuals who cannot medically tolerate them. After holiday breaks, so Jessica Ray, this is a good question. I touched on it earlier. I called it the number one tool in our toolkit for preventing the spread last year of COVID in our classrooms, and I don't have the same flexibility from the state. In particular, one of the problems is just a little rule that we follow every day, which is if we don't have 75% of the kids in our classrooms, then we don't get to call it a day of instruction. And so, if push comes to shove, I could close things down. I could say we're taking a break. If I extend it for more than 5 or 6 days, we have to make that time up at the end of the year. And it's hard to be successful at that because people already set their calendars and they leave, and then we don't ever get to 75%. So, I've been pushing our legislators to relook at that. They've got good points and bad points of why they don't support it, but it was a big help last year. And I bet what's going to happen is if you start seeing a lot of cases and a lot of quarantines, is I bet they're going to reconvene as a legislature, and that's going to become a topic that they do address. But they won't start the year that way. It's disappointing. I think I could put a lot of people at ease if I had that tool in my kit. I just don't right now. I do appreciate people who are saying thank you. I've gotten a lot of feedback via email. Um, it hasn't been the most polite, so but I know we do have a lot of support out there. And honestly, I know people are frustrated, and I'm saying trust me on this. Um, trust the school. We managed it last year. A lot of things we didn't want to do, but we thought we did it effectively. We thought we led the pack in this region, and I think it's important to start the school year with an added precaution of safety at that K-6 level, just until we know exactly what's going on in our schools. I've talked to colleagues in other school districts that have started with mask optional only, and within 5 days they've had lots of cases, positive cases pop up, and hundreds of quarantines, and it really has compromised their ability to have in-person instruction. That's not what we want to do to get started. But I am committed to this. Over and over again, I'll say it. I will keep looking at local data. Lots of new messages. Will there be an issue if my son decides to wear a mask outside? No, there will not be. If you want your kid to wear a mask in school and someone starts picking on him because of it, we will treat that as an act of misconduct. When we'll receive virtual open house schedules? I don't know. I'll have Mrs. Roy Borland, our new elementary principal, text me that, and I'll try to share it before we're done here. Or maybe she can just enter it into the chat. Why do parents have to get a doctor's note? Isn't a note from the parent good enough? No, not right now, but again, please work with me on that. If you have a concern and you feel like the mask is gonna cause a harm, I'll work with you. We'll try to figure out how to work with that. But we're employing the same strategies that we did last year. We asked that a doctor reinforce that. Schedules will go out Friday, and so you'll know, everything you need to know at the elementary about who your teacher is and stuff. Are fifth graders riding the bus with unmasked kids, high school kids? No, this is actually a federal law. At some point during the summer, school buses were deemed public transportation, and all public transportation has to wear masks. So the only place in the district will if your kid's riding a bus, legally they have to wear a mask on the bus. But fifth graders don't ride with high school kids. But if a high school kid were to get on a bus for some reason, the high school kid would have to wear a mask. Can teachers wear face shields so that kids can hear and see their faces? They have to wear a mask at the elementary, but again, it's something that teachers don't like. They know the masks get in the way of communication at times, and so again, the shields are an effective tool. They do mitigate some of the transmission, not all of it though, and they're not as effective as the face mask. So perhaps we add that in at some point, and maybe we scale back to that, but we're not going to start that way. Will items be shared in this school year? Like last year, everyone gets their own device? Yes. Yes, Mike, we have really upped our audio and visual technology in each classroom. So that stays the same. Virtual house information will be shared on Friday. Well, the same option that starting in person is okay, but if we feel we need to change to virtual after a couple of weeks, is this possible? We would allow that. You would go, that would be a year-long choice. Last year, I started that way, and then I stepped back when I really just felt like in-person was the way to go, because we are contracting through Oakland Schools. It's called VLAC, the Virtual Learning Academy Consortium. That is a year-long commitment. And you don't interact with the Whitmore Lake Public School teacher. So if a student has to go remote for some reason, they will zoom into the classroom. They'll follow what we call synchronous instruction. The class starts at 7:50 or whatever. They got to be logged in and ready to go at 7:50, or they get marked absent. And then they stay with the class like that all day. That's primarily going to be for kids who are symptomatically and exposed to a COVID positive or COVID positive themselves. Can I come and drop off a packet? The answer is yes, but let me touch on the fact that we are still restricting access to buildings because of this continued COVID situation. So just buzz in and they will let you in. We're restricting as many outside people to start the school year as possible, just to contain the people who we know are in the building. So again, I feel like this is just what I wanted you guys to ask a lot of questions. I'm not getting into all the detail of our policy. We will share out more detail. We're crafting it so it's a little easier to read. But if you have questions about it, if something just doesn't jibe with you, please feel free to email me personally. Like I said, I've taken a lot of emails. Some of them have been kind of insulting and I haven't responded back. But if you have a question and if it's respectful, my job is to answer the question. I want your kids in school and I want to keep those schools open. Are teachers, employees required to be vaccinated? No, they're not. We are gathering information, on who is vaccinated. Our numbers for teachers are pretty high, and I don't know the overall vaccination rate for the entire school district right now. But we are requiring our staff to tell us if they've been vaccinated, and that's because we have to treat um, close contact staff members differently who are vaccinated versus non-vaccinated. Thanks for adding that about the restraints. Uh, so it's not really a question about restraints. It's just sharing legal information on Michigan's seclusion and restraint laws, which really are aimed at how we manage kids who are out of control physically. So we're about 40 minutes into this. I'm not seeing any new questions pop up. This copy of this Zoom meeting will get put on our website. More clarification of our policy will be put on our website. And again, I'm going to reinforce, if whatever side you're on this mask issue, I would tell you that you should be an advocate for Whitmore Lake having local control. I said this before. We started off the year with the most progressive public school policy in Washtenaw County. We had 5-day instruction. We managed it very effectively. We didn't have classroom spread, and we don't have all the access to the tools as we had last year. So, we're starting more restrictive than I would like, but it's just out of an abundance of caution. If local control stays and we look like we're running a safe and effective school, we can always scale back. I'll give it one more minute for any other questions. I commented, some people asked for research. I really don't mean to blow people off on that stuff, but the CDC is loaded with it. We put those links in our system, but they're easy to find. COVID tracker from the CDC is a big one to use. Really, just if you look at the Washtenaw County Health Department, they've got a lot of information. And I always encourage you to talk to your doctor. If you don't like what the school is saying, and you want some medical information to support your cause, please, I don't want to look at a YouTube video, but I will listen to a doctor's opinion on it. So, one final question. Once things are scaled back, can we go virtual? Look, at any point in time, if you feel your kid is unsafe in our buildings because of a policy that I'm endorsing, I will talk to you about how to navigate that. And if that ends up being a contracted virtual option, yes, I would allow that. But I do want to talk to you about the differences between our educational platform and their educational platform first. So, but again, everyone's appetite for safety is a little different. If mine's not as big as what you need it to be, I will work with you. All right, thank you for your time, everybody. Again, if something hit you as you're thinking about this and reflecting on it, and you just feel like you have to ask, please email me, tom.dekeyser@whitmore.wlps.net, tom.dekeyser@wlps.net. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your support. Big shout out to our principals and teachers who are getting those buildings ready for your kids next week.